Welcome to Starbound. If you're sick of AI-generated slop and want real human storytelling, please subscribe to support this channel. My name's Aram, I'll be your narrator. Let's get into the story. The gnarl informant trembled, a low, guttural chant spilling from its primary mouth while its secondary feeding orifice emitted a series of desperate, whimpering clicks. Two heavy, clawed arms were pinned to its sides by magna cuffs, but its two smaller, six-fingered hands flitted before its face, weaving complex shapes in the humid, recycled air of Port Anarchy's undermarket. Lenora Varden felt the deck plates vibrate through the soles of her boots with each frantic utterance. Every syllable from the creature was another grain of sand dropping through the hourglass of her patience, and the glass was nearly empty. Her objective was straightforward: extract the location of a fugitive named Rylock. The gnarl knew. Its entire body thrummed with the knowledge. The problem was, its terrified prayer chant was in a rare pre-colonial dialect, and her translator was having a fit. Her military-spec Signon model, a mandatory piece of gear, according to the Bounty Hunters Guild Accords, was supposed to be the best in the galaxy. Instead, its holographic display flared with a furious, throbbing crimson error message. Cognitive dissonance event detected. Intent unverifiable. For your safety, the linguistic core has been hermetically sealed. Hermetically sealed. The digital equivalent of a full-body panic attack, complete with a fainting couch and a case of the vapors. Resorting to her cheap, half-fried backup would void the contract and the mountain of credits that came with it. Evidence submission had to be on an encrypted, guild-approved device. She tapped the inert piece of junk clipped to her belt, a casualty from a recent disagreement involving a badly aimed plasma grenade, and let out a low curse in her native language. Rigid, over-engineered, aesthetically flawless Signon technology had once again chosen the worst possible moment to protect her from something it couldn't file in triplicate. From about 6 meters away, Nico Nix Valdis shifted his weight, causing the teetering stack of hyperdrive cores he'd leaned against to groan ominously. He took in the scene. It wasn't the sputtering tech or the blubbering, multi-limbed informant that held his attention. It was her. Tall, coiled with a dangerous energy that was more compelling than any starship schematic he'd ever drooled over. She was poured into practical, graphite-colored armor that left her arms bare, showing off lean, corded muscles. A sharp jawline, a cascade of dark hair pulled back into a severe braid, and metallic silver eyes currently burning with enough contained rage to smelt wreckage. This wasn't just a problem unfolding. This was a beautiful, multifaceted opportunity wrapped in a temper. He pushed off the course, the worn synth leather of his jacket creaking a complaint, and ambled over, navigating the chaotic bazaar with an easy, familiar gait. "Trouble in paradise?" Nix asked. His voice was a smooth, relaxed counterpoint to the market's cacophony of haggling droids, sizzling food stalls, and leaking steam pipes. Lenora's silver eyes snapped to him, and the look she gave him could have flash-frozen magma.
"This is a finely calibrated instrument, human. It's a marvel of Signon design, not some piece of junk you kick back to life."
"Hey, percussive maintenance is a valid diagnostic tool in the right hands," he said, utterly unfazed. He leaned in, craning his neck to read the error message over her shoulder. The faint scent of charged ions from her armor and something uniquely, alluringly alien washed over him. His grin widened. Hermetically sealed. That's the official Signon error code for "we're too scared to even look at it." And the flaw with Signon tech is its crippling literalism. It translates words, but it quarantines intent if it encounters an emotion it deems illogical. Whatever that guy is babbling, he really means it, and your translator had a philosophical meltdown. She stared at him, her expression a perfect fusion of contempt and cornered desperation.
And you, I suppose, are an expert in Signan linguistic architecture?
Expert in breaking things that are built too well, he corrected cheerfully. Which, in my experience, is a much more useful skill. Let's pop the hood and let it breathe. These things are wound so tight they forget how to function. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, weighing the guild's stringent regulations against the very real possibility of her payday scurrying off-world. With a frustrated sigh that ruffled the front of his jacket, she unclipped the sleek translator and shoved it into his chest.
Fine, but if you damage it, you're buying me a new one, and then I'm using your spine as a coat rack.
Kinky. I like a girl with a 5-year plan, Nix quipped, his fingers already finding the microseam of a side panel. He pulled a compact mag driver from his belt and expertly pried the casing open. Inside was a tiny, perfect city of light, circuits glowing with a soft, steady luminescence. And at the center of it all, a single, pulsating chip, glowing a shade darker than the rest. "See this little guy?" he said, pointing the tip of the driver at it. "The intent suppressor, the digital chaperone, the logic priest. It's the problem. It found a feeling it couldn't classify, freaked out, and locked the whole party in the basement."
That chaperone is a multi-spectrum firewall designed to prevent data corruption from emotionally compromised sources,
she said through gritted teeth.
Ripping it out would be like performing brain surgery with a hammer.
Sometimes a hammer is exactly what you need to fix a watch built by committee, he replied, and before she could protest further, he jammed the mag driver against the chip and gave it a sharp twist. A shower of tiny, angry sparks erupted. A faint pop echoed in the small space, and the suppressor chip came free, clattering onto the grimy deck plates. He snapped the panel shut with a satisfying, deliberately ignoring the scorched look she was giving him. The act felt good, a small, righteous victory for chaotic pragmatism over sterile procedure. He'd just ripped the digital equivalent of a chastity belt off a military-grade computer, and he felt disproportionately proud of it. "Problem solved," he announced, wiping a smudge of grease from the casing onto his pants. "Let's see what it was so scared of." Nix handed the translator back with a showman's flourish. "Try now, gorgeous. No more nanny." As Lenora reached for the device, her fingers brushing his, Nix's gaze drifted past her. He noticed a large, strangely shaped machine half buried in a pile of discarded ship hulls. Unlike the rust buckets and dented plating surrounding it, its surface was a seamless, matte black material that seemed to create a hole in the neon light of the bazaar. It was undamaged, ancient, and completely out of place. He made a mental note to check it out later, maybe salvage it for parts, if it had any. Lenora clipped the translator to her belt and placed the small, custom-molded earpiece in her ear. She turned her glare back on the still-chanting Gnarl, her voice a low, dangerous command in her native Signan, a language of sharp consonants and smooth, melodic vowels.
"Report status."
A flicker of static crackled in the earpiece, and then something else. It was a translation, but a translation of a feeling, a raw concept. It wasn't Galactic Standard or Gnarl Clicks or even Signan. It was something entirely new, a tone that didn't travel through the air but seemed to bloom directly inside his skull. A series of resonant, foundational chimes intertwined with deep, guttural clicks that vibrated in the marrow of his bones. This was a language of pure intent, a command that reality itself was compelled to obey. The prime tongue. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The sleek black machine Nix had just noticed whirred to life with a sound like grinding continents. Its seamless plating shifted and separated, unfolding like a piece of lethal origami to reveal complex, alien joints that hissed with renewed pressure. A single cyclopean optical sensor, wide as a dinner plate, flared to life, glowing with a malevolent, predatory red. And it was locked directly on them. A high-pitched whine, the unmistakable sound of a weapon charging, sliced through the bazaar's clamor. The moment the Architect Warden activated, it sent a silent, powerful, and encrypted handshake signal out into the deep black. A login request to the nearest network hub. A digital flare announcing its awakening. On the battered datapad strapped to his wrist, Nick saw a tsunami of raw data that made his scanner's graphics card bleed pixels. The spike was bigger than the station's entire communications array.
Get down!
Lenora yelled, her voice cutting through his momentary shock. She moved with the liquid agility of a predator, tackling him and pulling him behind a mountain of rusted durasteel plating just as a searing bolt of white-hot plasma vaporized the spot where he'd been standing. The air crackled, smelling of superheated metal and toasted circuits. Pinned beneath her, the solid weight of her body a surprising comfort, Nyx peeked over the edge of their cover. The warden was methodically scanning the area, its red eye sweeping across the terrified, scattering crowds. "Okay," he panted, a wild, exhilarating thrill overriding any sensible fear. Maybe his prayer was more than a curse word. In the tight space, she was all lethal grace and focused fury. She wasted no time on recriminations.
"It's primary optic,"
she said, her breath warm against his ear.
"It's exposed when it fires. The armored casing retracts for a fraction of a second."
Nyx's eyes darted around their makeshift bunker. His gaze landed on a thick, sparking power conduit dangling from a damaged cargo crane overhead. A terrible, brilliant idea bloomed in his mind. "I've got it. Just distract it for a few seconds, and try not to get vaporized."
"That was already my intention, human,"
she deadpanned, but a hint of something new in her silver eyes. Not annoyance, but a grudging, startled respect caught the light. She moved with startling speed, rolling out from behind cover and laying down a disciplined pattern of suppressing fire from her sidearm. The blaster bolts ricocheted harmlessly off the warden's black plating, but it was enough. The red eye swiveled to track her. That was all the opening he needed. Nick scrambled up the junk pile, his boots finding purchase on bent support beams and discarded engine blocks. He reached the crane, his fingers closing around the frayed, sparking conduit. It felt like holding a live serpent made of pure voltage. With a wild, whooping yell that was equal parts battle cry and pure, unadulterated joy, he swung down. He slammed the live wires directly into the warden's glowing red eye just as the casing retracted. The machine let out a deafening electronic shriek, a discordant chord of pure synthetic agony. Its systems overloaded. The power core, unable to contain the raw, unfiltered energy he'd just mainlined into its central processor, went critical. It exploded with a concussive blast that shook the entire bazaar, sending shrapnel and twisted black metal tearing through the stalls like deadly confetti. The warden's destruction wasn't an end. It was a beginning. Its activation had been a login, and its death was a confirmation. The vast, dormant Architect network, stretching across the galaxy like a sleeping god's nervous system, was now aware of a valid command signature. It began a system-wide diagnostic, a slow, methodical awakening. On Port Anarchy, other, smaller pieces of forgotten Architect technology began to stir. A subtle hum resonated through the station's deck plates. The station's ancient, integrated security system, a relic of that same precursor race, cross-referenced the valid command it had just received with the user's biosignature. The logic was cold, alien, and absolute. Command signature valid. User profile null. Species signature unknown, not architect. Response: contain, eliminate foreign contaminant. Red alert lights, unseen for centuries, began to flash in deep maintenance corridors. Heavy emergency bulkheads, thick enough to withstand a torpedo blast, slammed down with ground-shaking finality, sealing off entire sectors. The station itself, a passive entity moments before, was now actively hunting them. Automated defense turrets swiveled in their hidden alcoves, their targeting sensors sweeping the corridors for the anomaly. One cocky human and one lethal Signon.
We need to move, now,
Lenora said, her voice a blade of calm in the rising storm of chaos. The air filled with the shriek of alarms and the panicked shouts of the station's inhabitants. They sprinted through the now chaotic bazaar, a perfectly synchronized unit of instinct and improvisation. Her tactical mind identified threats, a deploying turret here, a closing bulkhead there, while his improvisational genius spotted the escape routes, the shortcuts through maintenance ducts and over cargo containers. They reached a dead end, the main thoroughfare blocked by a panicked, stampeding crowd. Without breaking stride, Nyx put a firm hand on the small of her back, the touch sending an unexpected jolt through them both, and guided her through a narrow, debris-choked gap between two merchant stalls. On the other side, parked on a loading platform, was a sleek, single-pilot cargo speeder. Its engines hummed, left unattended in the panic. "That'll do," Nyx grinned, his mind already 3 steps ahead. He slid up to it, ripped a coolant line from a nearby generator, and shorted out the speeder's security lock with a sizzle of sparks. The cockpit canopy hissed open. The problem was immediately apparent. The cockpit was a sardine can built for one anorexic Signon. It was impossibly small for 2. "No time to argue," he said, sliding into the pilot's seat. He reached out, grabbed her arm, and pulled her down, practically into his lap. It was the only way. She had to brace herself against the main console, her back pressed firmly against his chest, her legs tangled with his. The proximity was sudden, absolute, and unexpectedly electric. He slammed the canopy shut and expertly guided the speeder off the platform, banking hard into the station's labyrinthine transport network. The small craft accelerated with a jolt, pressing her even tighter against him. Security drones swarmed after them like angry horn drones.
I can't get a clean shot,
she yelled over the engine's whine, her body too constrained to twist effectively. "Then hold on!" Nyx yelled back. He threw the speeder into a violent barrel roll. For a dizzying second, the pursuing drones were directly in her line of sight through the canopy. She fired twice, and 2 drones exploded into fireballs. He straightened out just as quickly.
Again,
she commanded. He grinned and spun the craft the other way, a wild, reckless corkscrew that gave her another perfect window. She took out a 3rd drone. They were a chaotic 2-person weapon system, his piloting creating the opportunities for her deadly marksmanship. The heat from her blaster and their bodies mingled in the confined space, creating a heady, adrenaline-fueled intimacy. He flew with a reckless skill that bordered on artistry. She coolly picked off drones with a surgeon's calm. But they were ridiculously outnumbered. A well-aimed shot from a heavy security drone clipped their port engine, sending them into a nauseating, uncontrolled spiral. Sparks erupted from the console, and the smell of burning electronics filled the tiny cockpit. "Hold on!" Nyx yelled, fighting the controls. He was no longer flying. He was aiming a crash. Below them, visible through a massive viewport, was one of the station's sprawling open-air junkyards, a massive canyon of discarded ships and forgotten technology. It was their only option. The crash was a symphony of screaming, tearing metal. The speeder hit a mountain of scrap, shedding parts as it tumbled end over end before finally coming to rest in a mangled heap. The impact threw them from the shattered cockpit, and they landed in a tangled heap of limbs and armor on a relatively soft pile of insulated wiring. Nyx ended up on his back, the wind knocked out of him, with Lenora's full weight on top of him. Her face was inches from his, her silver eyes wide with adrenaline. For a moment, they just lay there, breathing heavily, the station's alarms a distant wail. A slow smirk spread across his face. "You know," he said, his voice a little hoarse, Most Signans don't hold me like that on the first date." A ghost of a smile touched her lips as she pushed herself up slightly, bracing her hands on his chest.
"Most humans aren't worth holding."
He grinned back, the raw thrill of survival coursing through him. His hands came up automatically, checking her for injuries. His calloused, grease-stained fingers ran over the smooth, cold metal of her shoulder pauldron, then brushed against the warm, bare skin of her neck as he checked her pulse. The contrast was stark, and the gesture purely practical, yet it felt incredibly sensual. Lenora let out a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. The feeling was not from pain, it was from the unexpected, intimate jolt of his touch, a spark of connection in the heart of the chaos they had created. They found shelter deep within the junkyard, hidden inside the hollowed-out command deck of a derelict freighter. The station's searchlights swept across the metallic landscape outside, casting long, moving shadows. They needed a way out, and their only weapon was the one that had started all this. Lenora held the translator, her brow furrowed in concentration.
"The warden activated when I spoke a command in my own language. It should work again."
She focused, trying to recall the feeling of power from the bazaar, and spoke the Signan word for open, directing her will at a sealed blast door across the junkyard. The translator emitted a discordant screech, like grinding metal. The door remained shut. "Okay, my turn," Nyx said, taking the device. He pictured a path, a clear escape route through the wreckage, and said, "Clear a path." The result was a useless burst of static.
"It's not working!"
Lenora hissed, her frustration mounting.
"We're wasting time."
"It's because we're not on the same page," Nyx retorted, gesturing between them. "This thing isn't a dictionary, it's translating intent. When that warden turned on, you were furious. You wanted answers. You meant it. We have to mean it together." Just then, the brilliant white beam of a patrol drone searchlight swept over the freighter's broken viewport, illuminating their hiding spot. They both froze. In that single, shared moment of pure, primal desperation, their minds screamed the exact same thought. A thought that needed no words. Hide us. Lenora's training took over. She locked onto that single unwavering intent, her entire being focused on the desire for concealment. She instinctively whispered the Signan command, a single word that encompassed their shared will. Conceal. This time, the translator didn't screech. It emitted a perfect, resonant, foundational chime that hung in the air like a struck bell. Outside, a massive magnetic crane, dormant for decades, whirred to life with the groan of a resurrected god. With a deafening screech of protesting metal, it swung its arm, grabbing a massive sheet of Durasteel hull plating and slamming it into place over the freighter's opening. They were plunged into sudden, absolute darkness just as the searchlight passed over their position. They stared at each other's silhouettes in the gloom, breathing heavily. The air was thick with the dust they had disturbed and the sudden, staggering realization of what they now controlled. It wasn't just her voice or his idea. It required two components, fused into a single shared will. Her disciplined, laser-like focus and his chaotic, improvisational insight. Together, They were the key. There's only one person on this station who might know what the hell we've stumbled into, Nick said, breaking the silence. And he owes me. Big time. He led them through a maze of service tunnels and forgotten access ways, a route that existed only in the minds of scrappers and smugglers. Their destination was the fortified den of Skitter, a spindly arachnid info broker who traded in secrets the way other beings traded in credits, and who was constantly grooming one of his many optic sensors with a delicate silver tool. Skitter's den was a claustrophobic nest of humming servers and flickering data screens. The broker's many eyes swiveled to them as they entered, widening in alarm.
Valdis, the whole station is on lockdown. What have you done?
Nix didn't waste time with pleasantries. He activated his datapad and played the audio he'd recorded of the prime tongue, the resonant chime from the junkyard. The effect on Skitter was immediate and profound. The broker recoiled, his limbs trembling, a low clicking sound of terror emanating from his vocalizer.
By the forgotten stars, you fools! Turn that off! That's the command language for the Architect Network, the prime tongue.
We figured that part out,
Lenora said, her voice dangerously level.
What we need to know is why the station is trying to kill us for using it correctly.
Correctly?
Skitter's clicks became frantic.
You don't understand. That warden you activated, it didn't just wake up and send a distress call. The moment it powered on, it sent a successful login confirmation to the entire dormant network. For decades, every major power, every criminal syndicate has been trying to brute force that system. Peeking it, slamming it with algorithms, trying to find a way in.
He pointed a trembling appendage at a blinking icon on a star chart.
And you just gave it the password. Anyone with a listening post pointed in this direction just got a password accepted notification. They can triangulate the origin of your command, your key.
His finger jabbed at a colossal, ancient space station depicted on the chart.
The Sentinel, an Architect command station. Think of it as the network's central server. It just authenticated your login, and now it's broadcasting the active key's location to anyone who knows how to listen.
But why is it hunting us? Nix pressed. If we have the password, shouldn't it be rolling out the welcome mat? Skitter's many eyes swiveled between them, filled with a terrible certainty.
Because the Architects were xenophobes of the highest order. Their final command, hard-coded into every system, was simple. If anyone but an Architect ever gains control, purge the contaminant and then self-destruct the network to prevent its capture. You didn't just log in, you triggered an ancient dead man switch. The station isn't trying to stop you, it's trying to sterilize you.
The implications of Skitter's words were still sinking in when the reinforced door to the den didn't open. It imploded. A shaped charge blew it inward in a shower of molten metal. Armored soldiers, their black uniforms bearing the insignia of the Cygnan Ascendancy, stormed in, rifles raised. Their leader stepped through the smoke and fire, his movements measured and arrogant. He was a Cygnan, like Lenora, but where she possessed a coiled intensity, he projected an aura of cold, rigid authority. His eyes, like chips of ice, dismissed Nix with a sneer before locking onto Lenora.
Prefect Chronix,
she breathed, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. Lenora Varden, Chronix replied, his voice dripping with condescension. Always associating with the lowest forms of life. We've been slamming our most sophisticated algorithms against the Architect's firewall for a decade. Then a primitive human bypasses it with a crowbar, and a disgraced bounty hunter gives it a voice. His gaze fell on the translator at her belt. This power is a Cygnan birthright, discovered by our probes, contained by our technology. It is not a toy for degenerates and their chaotic pets. Hand over the device. Go to hell, Chronix, Nix snarled. That was all the invitation they needed. A brutal firefight erupted in the confined space. Laser bolts tore through Skitter's servers, sending up fountains of sparks. Skitter himself was cut down in the first volley, his many eyes going dark. Nix and Lenora moved as one, fighting back-to-back in a deadly, improvised dance. He laid down covering fire, shooting out the lights and using the sudden darkness to their advantage. She moved through the strobing flashes of blaster fire like a ghost, disabling soldiers with brutally clean shots to their armor joints. They were good, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Under the cover of a deliberately overloaded power conduit that exploded in a blinding flash, they dove through a ventilation shaft Skitter had always claimed was his emergency exit. They crawled through the cramped, greasy ductwork, the sounds of shouting and blaster fire fading behind them, and emerged into a deserted maintenance bay, the one that housed Nix's ship, the Tin Can. Alarms blared across the docking bay as they scrambled up the ramp of the Tin Can. Nix dove into the cockpit, his hands a flurry of movements across the console, bringing the ship's systems roaring to life. A moment later, they blasted out of the station, magnetic clamps screeching in protest, and made a short, gut-wrenching jump to the relative safety of a nearby asteroid field. In the sudden, deafening quiet of the cockpit, the adrenaline began to fade. The ship was a reflection of its owner, a space of organized chaos. Wires were bundled neatly but exposed. Custom-built modules were bolted onto standard consoles, and the navigation screen was a patchwork of 3 different manufacturers' software that only Nix could possibly understand. It was Frankenstein's monster of a freighter, and it flew like a dream. Lenora ran a hand over a console panel, her fingers tracing the seam of one of Nix's modifications.
My people build perfect cages,
she said, her voice quiet, almost lost in the low hum of the life support.
Every regulation, every failsafe. It's just another bar. They feel what they can't control. They see mystery, and their first instinct is to lock it in a box.
She turned to look at him, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight outside the viewport.
You,
she said, her gaze sweeping over the chaotic but perfectly functional cockpit.
build engines out of scrap that can fly to the stars. I am beginning to find your method more appealing.
It was a confession, an admission that his chaos spoke to a part of her that Signan Order had always tried to silence. A fragile, intimate moment of vulnerability hung between them, more charged than any firefight. Then, a proximity alert shattered it, a shrill, insistent beep. On the main screen, a dozen Ascendancy warships blinked into existence, emerging from hyperspace to form a perfect, inescapable blockade around the asteroid field. They were boxed in. The Ascendancy cruisers were moving into a classic hammer and anvil arrangement, cutting off all escape vectors. Running was impossible. Fighting was suicide. Nix stared at the tactical display, a wild, dangerous glint appearing in his eyes. He pulled up the star chart Skitter had shown them, zooming in on the colossal Architect Station, the Sentinel. "They want the key," he said, a slow, audacious grin spreading across his face. "Let's show them the lock." Lenora looked at him, then at the screen.
What are you talking about?
He pointed a grease-stained finger at the Sentinel. "We don't run. We don't fight them out here. We fly right into the Hornet's nest. That station. It's the server, the command center. It recognized us. It's waiting for us. We use the Translator to take control of it, tame the xenophobic beast, and turn its own guns on them." It was the most suicidally insane plan she had ever heard. It involved flying directly at a fleet of warships to reach an ancient alien doomsday weapon that they barely understood how to operate, all while being hunted by everyone in the sector. Lenora looked at him, at the unwavering confidence in his eyes, her earlier confession still hanging in the air between them. A slow, genuine grin spread across her own face, transforming her severe features into something breathtaking.
You're insane, human.
He grinned back, his heart thumping in his chest. And you love it.
Get us there,
she said, settling into the co-pilot's chair and beginning a weapons diagnostic.
I'll keep them busy.
The tin can shot out of the asteroid field like a bolt from a railgun. Nix pushed the engines past every safety limit he had personally installed, the ship vibrating so hard his teeth felt loose. Plasma fire from the Ascendancy fleet stitched across the blackness around them, explosions blossoming in silent, deadly flowers. Lenora, her hands a blur on the weapons console, targeted their cannons, aiming for enemy sensor arrays and shield projectors, creating fleeting gaps in their assault. They were a tiny, chaotic gnat in a swarm of methodical predators. A volley of torpedoes locked onto them, their icons screaming on the tactical display.
We're not going to make it!
Lenora yelled, her fire concentrating on the incoming warheads, but there were too many. Before she finished her sentence, a series of impossibly thin, brilliant blue scalpels of coherent light lanced out from the distant sentinel. They moved faster than thought, striking each torpedo with perfect accuracy. The warheads detonated prematurely, a harmless firework display in the distance. Nix let out a wild laugh. Oh, see? It wants us to get there. Another Ascendancy cruiser moved to block their path, its heavy cannons charging. Suddenly, its lights flickered and died. Its weapon ports went dark. A pinpoint beam from the Sentinel had sliced through its primary power conduit, leaving it dead in the star field. The station was clearing a path for them. And then they saw it. The Sentinel. It was a colossal, silent structure of seamless, light-devouring metal, shaped like a multi-planed jewel the size of a moon. It created a hole in the star field, giving off no reflection, no sign of life. As they rocketed toward it on a desperate, final approach, a section of its flawless surface slid away, revealing a hangar bay that glowed with a soft, internal light. It was an invitation. The station knew they had the key, and it was welcoming them home. Nix guided the tin can into the hangar, the bay doors sealing behind them with a silent, final hiss. The quiet inside was profound, absolute. The corridors leading from the hangar were unnervingly pristine, carved from a single thought. There were no visible seams, no bolts, no interface ports, just smooth, silent surfaces that hummed with a deep, dormant power that vibrated through the soles of their boots. Their footsteps echoed in the vast, empty space as they made their way towards the station's heart, the bridge. The bridge was a massive, cathedral-like chamber. In its center, a glowing, latticework structure pulsed with a slow, steady light. The station's primary processing core. Consoles, if they could be called that, were nothing more than smooth, featureless slabs of the same dark metal as the walls. As they entered, the sound of explosions echoed from a distant corridor. Prefect Chronix and his elite soldiers were blasting their way through a secondary entrance, unwilling to let their prize slip away. "Now time for subtlety," Nix muttered. He went to the main console, a featureless slab of metal directly in front of the core, and ran his hands over it. No interface, no keyboard, no ports, no problem. He dropped his pack and pulled out a plasma cutter and a heavy-duty, industrial-grade crowbar. Lenora watched, a look of horrified awe on her face as he carved a neat rectangle into the perfect ancient surface, and then jammed the crowbar into the opening. With a screech of protesting alien metal that must have been a deep insult to its long-dead creators, a panel came free. It was the ultimate act of human heresy. Technological graffiti on a masterpiece. He was brutally splicing his own gritty, wire and solder tech into this perfect, untouchable machine. Wires and data links snaked from his pack as he worked feverishly, bypassing millennia of elegant design with pragmatic brute force engineering. He patched the translator, still clipped to Lenora's belt, directly into the station's exposed core systems. Finished, he stood up and turned to her. Chronix's forces were getting closer, the sounds of their breaching charges growing louder. Nyx gently took the modified headset, now trailing a thick cable, and placed it on her head, his fingers lingering for a moment at her temple. The air crackled with more than just imminent battle. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "You're the voice. I'm the conductor." Their faces were so close he could feel the warmth of her breath on his lips. She didn't pull away.
Then I'll follow your lead, human,
she whispered, and her lips brushed against his in a silent, fleeting promise. The promise was broken by the sound of a wall imploding. Chronix and his soldiers burst onto the bridge, their rifles immediately opening fire. Plasma bolts seared the air, impacting against the far wall in brilliant, violent flashes. "Now!" Nyx yelled, his mind already racing. He didn't need to shout commands. He visualized their defense with perfect, desperate clarity. "Shield the bridge, raise a barrier, protect us." Lenora, connected to him through the intense, focused energy of the moment, felt his intent not as a suggestion, but as a clear, fully formed image in her own mind. She gave voice to their shared will, her disciplined focus shaping the raw power. She spoke the Signan command, a word that now felt as natural as breathing.
"Fortify!"
The translator, patched into the heart of the station, unleashed a resonant, powerful chord that shook the entire chamber. Instantly, shimmering blue energy shields erupted from the floor, encircling them in a protective dome. Chronix's plasma fire splashed harmlessly against the barrier. He stared, his face a mask of horror and rage. "Abomination!" he screamed, ordering his men to concentrate their fire. Nyx ignored him. He closed his eyes, focusing. He visualized the Ascendancy fleet outside, a clear tactical schematic in his mind. He saw their port shield generators, their primary power couplings, their engine manifolds, all exposed, all vulnerable. It was a complex, multi-layered plan, a symphony of targeted destruction. Lenora felt the intricate strategy pour into her from him, a cascade of pure, chaotic, brilliant data. Her mind, trained for tactical analysis, instinctively filtered it, simplified it, and translated it into a single, focused command that held the weight of their combined intent.
"Cripple them!"
The entire station shuddered. Its colossal, hidden weapon emplacements activated, and a volley of concentrated energy lanced out into the void. It wasn't a barrage. It was a scalpel. On the bridge's main view screen, which had flickered to life, they watched as Chronix's fleet was systematically disabled. Engines flared and died. Shield generators overloaded. Weapon systems went dark. The fleet was left dead in space, adrift and powerless, dismantled with contemptuous ease. Their synergy was perfect. It was a form of profound, unspoken intimacy, expressed through controlled, cataclysmic power. The last of Chronix's soldiers on the bridge fell, cut down by a newly activated automated turret that descended from the ceiling. Chronix himself, his face a portrait of shattered ideology, was vaporized by a pinpoint energy beam. He never understood that the power wasn't in the station or the language. It was in the union of their two minds. The station's defense systems fell silent. The shimmering shield around them dissolved. The bridge was a wreck of smoking metal and scorched walls. Adrenaline still singing in their veins, Nix and Lenora stood in the wreckage, panting, bruised and victorious. They slowly turned to face each other, the echoes of their shared power still resonating between them. The reality of what they had just done, what they had become, washed over them. They didn't just survive. They had wielded the power of gods together. They were both covered in sweat and grime, the acrid smell of burnt circuits hanging heavy in the air. The fight drained out of them all at once, leaving them exhausted and leaning against a damaged console for support. Something else rushed in to fill the void, a raw, undeniable current that had been building since the moment they met. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing the smudge of dirt from her cheekbone. His touch was hesitant, gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of the last few hours. "You know," he said, his voice low and ragged, "humans fix things, but sometimes," he looked into her silver eyes, "they just make it hotter." He was expecting a witty comeback, a sarcastic jab, the familiar rhythm of their banter. Instead, she said nothing. She grabbed the front of his jacket with both hands, her grip surprisingly strong. She pulled him in with a force that took his breath away and silenced him with a kiss. It wasn't a kiss of gentle exploration or hesitant curiosity. It was a kiss of claiming. It was explosive, desperate and passionate, a release of all the pent-up tension, fear, and desire of their chaotic ordeal. It tasted of adrenaline and victory and the static-filled air of the ancient station. It was her final, definitive surrender to the beautiful chaos she had secretly craved her entire life. A powerful, unspoken declaration that sealed their bond in fire and desire. Back on the patched-up bridge of the Tin Can, a new kind of energy buzzed between them. The Sentinel, their silent, obedient monolith, hung in the void between them, their secret weapon and their shared legacy. The Translator rested on the console between their seats, a simple piece of tech that had become the symbol of their impossible bond. Nix punched coordinates into a random, uncharted star system in the deepest, most lawless part of the Outer Rim, a place where they could be anonymous, a place where they could begin anew. Lenora leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her body fitting perfectly against his as if she were a missing piece of him he never knew he'd lost.
"Where to now, human?"
she asked, her voice softer and richer than he'd ever heard it. He grinned, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her tight. The ship felt less like a collection of scrap and more like a home. "Wherever we want." His hand covered hers as he engaged the hyperdrive. The stars outside the cockpit stretched, warped, and then converged into a tunnel of shattered rainbows. The violent roar of the engine settled into a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the deck plates, a steady heartbeat for their new life. In the quiet of the cockpit, Lenora leaned her head back against his shoulder. A small indicator light on a panel Nix had obviously jury-rigged flickered erratically. Once, the imperfection would have driven her to distraction. Now, without a thought, she reached over and gave the panel a firm tap with her knuckle. The light steadied into a solid green glow. A small, wry smile touched her lips as she looked at her own hand, as if surprised by the gesture.
My whole life I was taught there was a procedure for everything,
she said softly, her voice a low murmur against the engine's thrum.
a regulation, a proper tool for the proper task. You and your people.
She shook her head in fond disbelief.
You just proved that for the truly impossible situations, the only tool you need is a crowbar and the guts to use it.
Nix chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that filled the small space. He tightened his arm around her, pulling her impossibly closer. I've always been good at taking things apart, he admitted, his gaze fixed on the swirling colors of their passage. Figured that was my only real talent. Never thought I'd find someone who'd help me build something instead. Something that matters. Their eyes fell in unison on the translator resting on the dash between them. Scuffed, slightly scorched at the seams, but radiating a faint, dormant energy. It was no longer a piece of Signan tech or a human-modified tool. It was theirs, the symbol of their impossible union. Lenora picked it up, turning the scarred casing over in her hands.
The Signan architects called it a cognitive dissonance event,
she mused, tracing the seam Nix had pried open.
An illogical, overwhelming wave of pure intent. A catastrophic bug in the system to be quarantined and sealed away for everyone's safety.
She turned to look at him, her silver eyes bright with a fire that was no longer just rage, but a fierce, brilliant joy.
They were wrong.
It's not a bug, gorgeous, he said. It's a feature. He grinned, that familiar, brilliant flash of chaos and confidence that she had come to cherish, that had shattered her perfect cage and set her free. Their little ship, their perfect, jury-rigged sanctuary, streaked through the cosmos, a defiant beacon of life and improbable victory.